Okay. Mr. Doherty, could you let Mr. Gator know the jurors can come right in?
I will, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Oh, we're ready for the jurors.
What?
Do you wish for the doctor
Yeah.
to be sworn in?
Yeah.
Now, do you have a present academic appointment?
I have a clinical appointment at the University of Massachusetts Medical School as an associate clinical professor.
And what are your responsibilities in that role?
I primarily supervise residents and fellows who are in the Child Psychiatry Fellowship Training Program. I occasionally give lectures within the university.
How long has your practice focused on children and adolescents?
I've worked with children and adolescents since 1983. I think with one exception, and that was when I spent some time at the Worcester State Hospital on an adult unit.
I believe that you said it was in the mid-'80s where you started working as an adolescent and child psychiatrist. Can you give us an overview of the different positions you've held since then? Since you
Yes,
began?
I'll do my best.
I certainly don't mean to step on Ms. Regan's direct. She's welcome to continue, but the Commonwealth is certainly not contesting Dr. Jackson's credentials at all.
Thank you.
Okay. Do you want me to go on?
Well, maybe I can just,
Okay.
you've worked as a treating psychiatrist at Metro West Medical Center?
That's right. I
And-
worked as the medical director for their child development unit and served as the principal child psychiatrist for some years as well.
And you also worked at Taunton State Hospital
I did.
for quite a few years, correct?
I did.
And what was your role there?
As I said, I had two roles. One was a medical director for an acute residential inpatient program. And when that program was closed by the state, I became an attending psychiatrist on an adult long-term care unit.
Now, you also have worked as a consultant, as a child and adolescent psychiatric consultant for the Learning Center for the Deaf, correct?
That's correct.
And you've done that since 1992.
Yes, correct.
And you have written peer review articles, correct?
Yes.
And what are peer review articles?
Peer review articles are articles in scientific journals which are reviewed by one's peers and critiqued for their scientific validity.
And it's fair to say that the last peer review article that you wrote was in 1985, correct?
I think that's correct.
And the title of that was Teaching Pediatric Psychopharmacology, an Interdisciplinary Model, correct?
That is correct.
And that was in the American Academy Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, correct?
Correct.
Were you Phillip Chism's treating psychiatrist in October of 2015?
I was.
And where was that at?
It was at the Worcester Recovery Center and Hospital where I'm presently an attending physician. And Phillip was treated on an adult forensic unit C1.
Was he inpatient or outpatient?
He was inpatient.
And approximately how long was he inpatient?
Approximately 2.5 weeks.
And as his treating psychiatrist, what was your role?
Well, my role was to evaluate his clinical state, to do an evaluation for the presence or absence of mental illness, to assure his safety, to coordinate the treatment team's efforts to do a clinical evaluation. Was my role.
Now, at the end of Mr. Chism's stay at Worcester Recovery Center, did you reach a diagnosis?
I did.
And what was that diagnosis?
I made 2 diagnoses for Mr. Chism. One was a depressive state, a major depression, and the other was a brief transient psychotic episode.
Can you explain what a brief transient psychotic episode is?
It's a formal diagnostic term, but it's a generic term as well. It applies to experiences of people who become acutely disorganized in their behavior, their language, their thought, and aren't able to cope with day-to-day functioning.
And what does it mean to be psychotic or have psychosis?
That again is a generic term, so it can apply to a number of different mental conditions or diagnoses, but psychosis generally means the experience of symptoms which severely impair one's ability to deal with day-to-day reality.
Now, what did you rely on in making your diagnoses? I'd ask you not to get into the details, but just tell us your sources of information that you
Yes.
relied on.
I will have to hear counsel at the sidebar on the issue.
Dr. Jackson,
Yes.
in forming your diagnosis, you relied on information from a number of sources, correct?
Yes, I did.
You received a report from a court psychologist, correct?
That's correct.
You received 2 reports of psychological testing done in the fall of 2015, correct?
That's correct.
And you met with Phillip Chism on a number of occasions, correct?
That is correct.
And you had the input from the rest of your treatment team, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That included people that work on the ward, correct?
That's right.
And other professionals that came in contact with Mr. Chism.
Yes.
Now, was there anything else that you relied on in forming your opinion?
Not primarily. Those were the sources.
Now, you had an opportunity to make observations of Phillip Chism while he was at Worcester Recovery Center, correct?
Yes.
Without telling us anything that Phillip Chism said to you, can you tell us what psychological symptoms or psychiatric symptoms you personally observed in Phillip Chism?
Yes, I will. First of all, I tried to see Phillip every working day. that I was in the hospital, albeit for brief periods of time. During those visits, Phillip seemed to me to be significantly withdrawn. He seemed to me to be unable to really coherently describe what his experience was on a day-to-day basis. He needed the help of a lot of direct questions just about his daily functioning. He stayed in his room a great deal, often reading books that I think were language instruction books, not venturing out of the room, and occasionally then in the evening playing chess with the attendants who were with him. So his functioning, even in a very structured setting, was at a pretty low level. He also seemed to me to be significantly emotionally withdrawn and disconnected. So those were my direct observations.
During Mr. Chism's stay at Worcester Recovery Center, did you prescribe any medication?
Yes, I did.
And what did you prescribe?
Risperidone.
And what is Risperidone?
Risperidone is a second-generation antipsychotic medication that's quite efficacious for helping people organize their thinking.
And how long was Phillip at the hospital before you prescribed the medication?
I'm not sure I can remember that exactly. There were a number of things we had to do before we were able to prescribe the medication, among them get his mom's permission to do so. So I was with him for at least, I would say, a week or a week and a half before prescribing the medication.
Did you notice an effect of the medication on Mr. Chism after he began taking it?
I did.
Can you explain?
Mr. Chism was significantly more present and engaged and willing to talk and have an interaction with me, and that observation was shared by other staff members and by the treatment team. Mr. Chism also himself noted the change and asked for a second dose of the medication.
What significance do you attribute to this change in Phillip Chism after taking the medication?
My formulation of the change is that Phillip was experiencing significant anxiety and depression prior to the administration of the medication, and that those strong emotions were partly to blame for the disorganization of his thinking. When he was able to be calmer and less anxious, he was better able to organize his thinking and his communication with others.
Did you consider malingering? And first I must ask you, what is malingering?
Malingering is the endorsement of symptoms that aren't in fact present in order to avoid the consequences of legal proceeding, for instance, or other consequences that might be perceived as unwelcome to a person. Did
you consider malingering?
I did.
And can you explain how you considered it as regards Mr. Chism?
I understood that Mr. Chism had endorsed many symptoms that were so frequent that it was unlikely that these particular symptoms were the result of mental illness, and were likely to indicate that Mr. Chism was falsely endorsing a number of serious symptoms.
And did you find that Mr. Chism was malingering?
In his contact with me, no. That being said, I specifically avoided a number of the probes and queries of the evaluations which I knew had already been done. So I confined myself to my experience with talking with Mr. Chism himself. If in fact Mr.
Chism was engaging in malingering, how would that affect your diagnoses?
The diagnosis of malingering doesn't preclude other diagnoses. So in my work with Mr. Chism, I tried to focus specifically specifically on what was going on for him on a day-to-day basis and what his experience was subjectively. I didn't focus on the proceedings that were underway or focus on areas that might call upon him or anyone else to fabricate or imagine symptoms.
Do people with serious mental illness exaggerate their symptoms?
Yes, frequently.
And if you find that they exaggerate their symptoms, does that rule out a severe mental illness?
No, not necessarily.
Can you explain?
Well, yeah. When a person's exaggerating their symptoms, there's an element of anxiety about their situation. And that anxiety, in my mind, it has relevance to their exaggeration. That doesn't mean that they're not also experiencing symptoms that are more directly connected with another mental illness.
Okay. If I may have a moment. Let's see, hold on, I'm sorry. During Philip's hospitalization, did you personally observe him visit with anyone?
Yes, I did. I observed him visiting with his mother.
Thank you, I have no further questions.
Okay, cross-examination, please, Ms. McDougall.
Dr. Jackson, people without mental illness also malinger, isn't that true?
That's certainly true.
And in fact, people facing serious criminal charges without mental illness are at great risk for malingering.
That's possible. I'm not an expert on malingering.
Well, in fact, you testified that some of the sources of information you had informing your opinion was testing done in the early fall. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That was certain psychological testing done by Dr. Kelly Casey and Dr. Nancy Hebben, correct?
And that is correct.
And that testing, in fact, indicated a likelihood of malingering on the part of the defendant, Phillip Chism.
I had the test, I didn't have the test protocols, but I had the test reports, and I had them reviewed by our psychology department, and they confirmed that those tests were positive for the presence of malingering.
Now, when you were treating Mr. Chism in October of 2015, were you asked at all to look at his mental state in October of 2013?
No, I was not.
Your sole purpose was providing accurate treatment and assessment of Mr. Chism in October of 2015, correct?
Correct.
And in fact, your ultimate diagnosis was that in October of 2015, he was suffering from an acute depressive state, is that correct?
Correct.
And that he was had experienced a brief transient psychotic episode.
Correct.
And fair to say brief and transient have their common meaning?
That's right.
And certainly when he was discharged from the hospital on November 4th, you did not believe he was still in the throes of this episode.
That's correct.
And you have no idea when it started, is that correct?
No, I would not.
And in fact, one of your concerns, both in your initial evaluation of Mr. Chism and your ultimate diagnosis, was that the trigger for this brief transient psychotic episode was the stress of trial.
That's correct.
And in fact, Mr. Chism, the beginning process of Mr. Chism's trial had started on October 7th of 2015. Is that correct?
I believe so.
So less than a week before his admission to Worcester Recovery Center.
Correct.
And you were asked on direct about Mr. Chism being inpatient at Worcester Recovery Center. In fact, he was inpatient at Worcester Recovery Center under a court order. Is that correct?
Objection.
His admission status was Section 15B, an evaluation of competency.
Ordered by the court.
Ordered by the court.
If
No.
counsel wishes to be seen at the sidebar relative to any limiting instruction, I'd be happy to see you. If not, I will. Did you wish to be seen, Ms. Regan?
Yes.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence that you heard that the defendant was at Worcester Recovery on a court order can be considered for you by you on a very limited purposes, so that you can understand the direct testimony relative to the inpatient treatment. You can't consider that in any way as it relates to anything concerning the defendant's character, or indeed anything concerning the defendant's mental state in October of 2013.
Dr. Jackson, you described, I believe, on direct, and correct me if I'm wrong, a brief transient psychotic episode as being, the hallmarks of that being that the individual is acutely disorganized in behavior and thought. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, the hallmark of that diagnosis is disorganized behavior and thought, correct?
Correct.
Not organized, not purposeful behavior and thought.
That's correct.
And you indicated that you, at some point during his stay of October 15th to November 4th, you prescribed Risperdal, correct?
That's correct.
Is the fact that Risperdal improved someone in any someone's behavior or how someone feels, does that in any way confirm a particular diagnosis, or are there multiple things that Risperdal can assist with?
There are multiple things it can assist with.
And one of those things is a personality disorder, correct?
I would say no.
Okay. You wouldn't prescribe Risperdal for a personality disorder?
No, definitely not.
Are you aware that others would?
I'm not aware, but, they may.
And in fact, there's really no treatment for a personality disorder, is there?
That's correct. As far as I can tell, there's no pharmacologic treatment for personality disorder.
Okay.
There are treatments that are psychosocial, but personality disorders are not accessible primarily by pharmacology.
And doctor, what's a personality disorder?
Personality, well, I'm not sure that I'm qualified to give you an academic view of it, but it's a disorder of functioning with other people and in one's life that chronically exposes them to outcomes that are less than ideal for themselves or others, that people make poor choices in their lives.
There's an absence of empathy?
For some personality disorders, yes. For others, no.
There can be an absence of being able to make connections with other people?
That's true.
And there's an absence of remorse for any conduct one engages in, is that correct?
Again, for some personality disorders.
Well, specifically antisocial personality disorder would be a disorder for which those things are true. Is that correct?
Objection.
Well, if counsel needs to be seen at the sidebar, I will. I certainly can, I better say it at the sidebar. I'll see counsel at the sidebar.
Do you need me to repeat the question, doctor?
Yes, please.
With respect to each of the things I just described, are those present in someone with an antisocial personality disorder?
Yes, they are.
Now, doctor, when Mr. Chism arrived at Worcester Recovery Center, that was October 15th of 2015, is that correct?
Correct.
And on October 16th of 2015, you completed a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. You dictated it, at least.
Right.
Okay. And then ultimately, your diagnosis is contained in your discharge note of November 3rd of 2015.
That's correct.
Sir, but as early as October 16th, when you dictated your comprehensive psychiatric evaluation, you had already concluded on an admitting diagnostic profile for Mr. Chism. Is that correct?
I don't actually, to be honest, don't recall what I said in the comprehensive.
Would having an opportunity to review it assist you?
If you like.
Yeah, approach this one.
Sure.
Not sure what you're referring to.
And I apologize for my highlights, I can draw your attention to page 7, although you're welcome to review whatever part of the document you want.
I've read the highlights. Is that what you want me to respond to?
Does that, I don't want to mislead you. If the highlighted portion does indicate you reached an initial diagnosis or an admitting diagnosis for Mr. Chism?
No, it really doesn't. It means that the symptoms are consistent with the diagnosis, but it doesn't mean that I've made a conclusive diagnosis by any means.
No, and what I asked you is if that was the admitting diagnosis. In fact, that's what it says, isn't it?
Yes, that's what it says.
So understanding this was not your conclusion, this was your admitting diagnosis.
That's correct.
And can you explain to us how Axis 1, Axis 2, Axis 3 works in terms, and so on the DSM-5?
Yes, okay. Axis 1 refers to mental illness that is the focus of treatment. Axis 2 refers to either personality disorders or to developmental neurocognitive impairments, which may affect a person's overall functioning. And Axis 3 is physical illnesses, impairments, past problems of a medical nature.
And with respect to Phillip Chism, the Axis 1 diagnostic profile on October 16th was transient stress-induced psychotic episode, nonspecific. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then a note to rule out a nonspecific mood disorder.
That's correct.
And for Axis 2, which you indicated as personality disorders, you have a note to rule out a schizotypal personality disorder. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And also under Axis 2 to rule out malingering. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But ultimately, you didn't do a greater assessment of Phillip Chism for malingering. You essentially tried to assess whether he was malingering with you. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, he had already been assessed for malingering at that point.
And what is a schizotypal personality? Well, let me ask you this. Is a schizotypal personality disorder schizophrenia or something different?
It's something different, and I was trying to reach for a descriptive term which would capture a lack of connection with other people.
And in fact, similarly, schizoaffective disorder, that's not schizophrenia either.
That's a matter of debate. In my view, schizoaffective disorder is one of the subcategories of schizophrenia.
Okay. But in fact, on discharge, which was your conclusion with respect to Mr. Chism, you indicate that the experience he's reported to you did not seem characteristic. And ultimately, you could not diagnose someone of Mr. Chism's age with schizophrenia. Is that correct?
We need to make observations of Phillip Chism. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Were you able to do a clinical interview of him in 2014?
Can we be seen?
Sure.
Dr. Jackson, does stress cause psychotic episodes absent mental illness?
Yes, it can.
Can you explain?
Well, when stress is sufficient, the body's response to fight or flight, for instance, becomes so severe that folks begin experiencing anxiety in their thinking, in their bodies. A good example of this is the post-traumatic stress disorder of soldiers who have to go through war and experience post-traumatic stress, and then develop symptoms that are, to some extent, psychotic in nature.
So, but once the person is having the psychotic episode, it is a mental illness.
Yes.
Now, after you started, Mr. Chism, on the medication, he continued on it during his stay at Worcester Recovery Center, right?
Yes, he did.
And did you prescribe him to continue?
Yes, I did.
And why did you prescribe him to continue on the medication?
I thought that the medication had produced a material benefit in terms of his ability to be present, to function, to communicate with others, and a material reduction in his anxiety. He told me when he was in the hospital.
I'm sorry, you have to stop there.
Okay.
Okay. Now, there was an admitting diagnostic profile that you compiled, correct?
That's right.
And is it fair to characterize that as a working hypothesis?
That's correct.
And it's just a starting point for your evaluation of your patient?
That's correct. It's a requirement to create a diagnostic profile as a result of that evaluation.
If I could have a moment.
Sure.
I have no further questions.
Did you read across?
Dr. Jackson, you recommended that he remain on the Risperdal. You just testified on redirect, I think it was, is that correct?
I did.
But in fact, the morning before he was due to go back to court, his last full day in the hospital, he just chose to skip his medication that day. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Any redirect? Ms. Regan?
Yes. Is it common for mentally ill patients to occasionally refuse their medication?
Yes.
I'll overrule the objection.
Thank you.
Anything further, Ms.
I would
Mitchell?
just ask one further question.
Sure.
Dr. Jackson, did he refuse his medication any other time during his stay?
Not that I'm aware of.
I have nothing further.
Any redirect?
No.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to do is give you an instruction relative to the view. And before I get into the instructions on the view, let me tell you that we can leave at 11:45, but we don't have to leave at 11:45. In other words, make sure you're comfortable before we leave. And I will also tell you that there is a restroom on the bus. We're not going on some lousy bus without shock absorbers. So I hope that alleviates some of the natural concern that some of you may have. So, members of the jury, you're about to visit a place about which you have been hearing testimony and will hear testimony during the trial. In court terminology, we call this a view. The purpose of the view is to help you better understand the evidence that you have heard and will hear during the trial, and to help you appreciate the location and the surroundings. The view that you will take is part of this case. The observations that you make while you are on the view may be used and considered by you in your deliberations in reaching a verdict. The places where you will go are as follows: Danvers High School and grounds, including stopping and walking around. BJ's Warehouse, where we'll just stop but not get out of the bus. AMC Liberty Tree Mall, stop outside but don't get out of the bus. Drive by and point out Wendy's while exiting the Liberty Tree Mall. A location on Route 1 in Topsfield, and then we will return to court. The attorneys and I will accompany you on the view. The attorneys may point out to you arrangements of a scene and items at locations that they want you to take notice of, but otherwise they may not discuss anything in regard to this case with you. While you are on the view, you are not to take any notes, not to bring your notebooks, not to take sketches. You are not to conduct any independent investigation while we are there, or indeed at any point during this trial. You are not to return to the scene until a verdict has been returned in this case. What you are to do on a view can really be broken down or summarized by two words you're very familiar with: stop and look. Your responsibility is to see the place, observe it carefully, and remember what you observe. During your trip to and from the places I have mentioned, you are not to discuss this case or anything about this case among yourselves or with anybody else. You will be under the supervision of the court officers at all times, and you will remain together until you are returned to court unless the court officers direct you otherwise. There will be cruisers in front and behind the bus. Under no circumstances should any of you during the course of your service as jurors in this case take any unauthorized view of any location which was mentioned by any witnesses or attorneys in this case. Now, in a moment, Clerk Magistrate Draper will administer the oath to the court officers who will accompany us on the view. This is an oath that has been given to court officers for many, many years. And if you listen to this oath carefully that the court officers take, it will cover not only their responsibilities in supervising you and the responsibility of the attorneys, but will help inform you through the oath of the purpose of the view. Ms. Draper, if the court officers could be sworn.
Yes, Your Honor. Do you solemnly swear that you will take this jury upon the premises, place, or places in question, and suffer them to view the same place, property, or thing which they may deem necessary for the determination of the issue, that you will not permit the parties to enter into a debate within the hearing of the jury, nor any person to speak to them, unless it be the assistant district attorneys or the attorneys for the defendant, and they only to point out such things as they deem necessary for the determination of the issue, and that you will keep this jury together until they shall have returned into court, unless the court shall otherwise order, so help you God.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, when you're ready, let the court officers know. Court will be in recess.
All rise.
All right, I'm going to have to ask some questions if we could swear in the defendant, please.
Mr. Chism, would you please stand, sir? Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear you will make true
Sir, again, I'm not going to repeat questions that I've already asked you that are not required to be repeated. Have you taken any prescription medication, narcotics, or alcohol today, sir?
Yes.
What have you taken?
Prescription medication.
Okay, and is it in any way interfering with your ability to understand what's going on?
No.
Do you feel like you have a clear mind right now and understand what's happening, sir?
Yes.
All right, sir, it's my understanding through your attorneys that you wish to waive your presence, give up your right to be present tomorrow for a hearing that's going to take place outside the presence of the jury. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, the hearing tomorrow is important. Everything in a trial is a criminal stage of the proceedings where you have a right to be present. You also have a right to waive your presence, however. But the hearing tomorrow is going to be about whether a witness can testify and also whether Dr. Dudley can rely on that witness in his expert opinion. It's a very important hearing. Do you understand that, sir?
Yes.
And have you had enough time to talk to Mr. Osler and your other attorneys, if necessary, about the decision not to be here tomorrow afternoon for the hearing?
Yes.
And is it your desire not to be present, sir?
Yes.
Has anyone forced you or threatened you to make that decision?
No.
Have you had enough time to discuss it with your attorneys?
Yes.
Are you confused by any of the questions I've asked you?
No.
Are you deciding to give up your presence tomorrow afternoon willingly, voluntarily, and understanding the implications?
Yes.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, I just find the decision to waive presence being made knowingly, voluntarily, and intelligently, and the waiver for the hearing tomorrow is hereby accepted. All right, court will be